Hey all, this is my general overview of Mythic plus Neltharus from the POV of the Casting Mistweaver. I've tried to note where I like my cooldowns, which mobs to prioritize for CCs and interrupts, and commonly unavoided damage that we shouldn't have to heal through, but most likely will. Wardens fire a frontal blast from their shields called Volcanic Guard. This is a long cast, but just make sure you watch out if your tank is chain pulling, and you end up caught in between them and a guard that's lagging behind. They also cast Blazing Slash, which is a bit of a tank buster on higher keys. On the way to Magma Tusk, you'll run into the Thaumaturge, which casts Magma Conflagration, a channeled dot on a random player, and that'll require some spot healing. But the main cast that the Thaumaturge does is Molten Core, which it casts on one of the elementals, transforming it into a stronger elemental and causing it to pulse continuously for increasing group-wide damage. This is likely going to be the priority interrupt, and it could take some major healing cooldowns to recover from if it's allowed to cast on a high fortified key, so be watching in case that's allowed to go off. Plunderers cast Molten Concoction, just make sure you dodge the swirl on the floor. The first boss, Magma Tusk, will cast Lava Spray, which is a frontal that tracks a random player. Everyone except the target can dodge it, assuming that person isn't running around like a headless chicken. He'll also charge at a random player, which everyone can dodge, and once he hits the wall, he'll send out a bunch of lava waves, so use the gaps to get through them. Whenever this happens, there's actually more waves than the last time the longer the fight goes on, courtesy of his Volatile Mutation buff, which stacks. Periodically, he'll cast Volatile Mutation, which is a big hit of group damage, plus a 10-second dot that really hurts, so as soon as you're clear of the waves, you want to pump some group healing, maybe alternating between Yu'lon and Sheilun's Gift each time he casts it. Otherwise, do your best to dodge white swirls on the ground, and don't stand in fire. On the way to Chargath, you'll run into hunters that charge a ranged player, doing initial damage plus a bleed dot. Also dodge their binding spear swirls, otherwise your group has to spend time breaking you out. Trainees do a channeled frontal called Magma Fist. Just don't walk into this by accident, especially if they're being dragged all over the place. The mini-boss Lahar casts Eruptive Crush. Just dodge the impact swirl and the additional smaller swirls that form after. Otherwise he'll stack a magic dot on the tank, which is something you'll want to dispel periodically. And he'll cast an AoE called Burning Roar that you can interrupt or just walk out of. Bone Tenders are just ranged mobs with a heal called Mending Clay, which you want to interrupt or CC. The double hunter pack before the boss might be worth using healing cooldowns for, since a double charge and bleeds can get out of hand on higher keys, especially fortified. On Chargath, make sure you focus healing on the massive bleed dot from Dragon Strike, which goes on one random player at a time, and do your best to dodge Magma Wave, which is just a frontal in a random direction from the boss. Occasionally, he'll target multiple players with Grounding Spears, which each do an AoE burst on those targeted players and drop flame patches on their locations. These chains actually latch onto these three targets, and the goal is to drag them over the boss. You want to drag all three chains over the boss before he can cast Fiery Focus, or the damage from that group AoE will probably kill everyone. The only catch is that there's a burst of group damage and a stacking dot from each time a chain is brought over him, so you might want to space them out a bit and stagger. The third chain break is actually what stuns him, making him take a lot more damage for a few seconds, so as long as everybody's taken care of for healing, you can put in a little bit of DPS here. It's possible you could space out the chain break so there's time to heal and let the stacks drop, but it doesn't give you a lot of time to do all this, so chances are you'll end up healing through some serious group damage. So do your best to do this chain mechanic properly, and expect to see this mechanic get screwed up a lot. On the way to the third boss, you run into a lot of familiar trash, but also some new mobs. Iron Torches will cast a frontal breath you'll want to dodge, but they also cast Mote of Combustion, which is a priority interrupt since it puts a massive dot on the target if it's allowed to go off. Aside from this, you'll want to interrupt the flares and dodge the fire swirls spawned by lava bearers. Bone Splitters throw axes at random players that put deadly dots in them, so make sure you heal that up quick. And if you decide to pull the commander, spread for his major ability and dodge swirls on the floor. Blacksmiths will cast Forge Stomp that interrupts casting, so don't get caught mid-cast when that's going off. They also have a tank buster called Reverberating Slam, which can start to hurt on high fortified keys. And if you decide to pull the Monstrosity pack, just know that it does pulsing AoE damage on the whole group till it dies. Forge Master casts Might of the Forge, which pulses group damage for a few seconds. Especially on tyrannical weeks, it might be worth alternating Yu'lon and Shi'Luns to handle this each time it's cast. He'll also toss his shield and spawn lines of fire swirls in the cardinal directions. Just do your best to dodge these. And the boss occasionally channels Heated Swings on the tank, which does significant damage, then knocks them back and tries to charge at the location, which can easily kill them if they fail to dodge the final hit. The boss's Forge Stomp will cause a bunch of swirls to spawn for a few seconds, so you want to keep dodging those. And the important bit is that he'll actually go into his next Might of the Forge channel. That's the one that pulses group damage for a few seconds. He does this a few seconds before the swirls from Forge Stomp have finished spawning. So you might actually have to deal with a bit of overlap for a few seconds, maybe manage your cooldowns a bit differently, or just react a bit faster and on the move during this brief overlap. On the way to the last boss, the most dangerous mob is the Blazewing, which casts Candescent Tempest, a few seconds of massive group damage and continued pushback. It might be a good idea to get close so you can continue spamming heals during the entire pushback without outranging anyone, but keep in mind the grates actually do ticking fire damage if you stand on them, and if anyone else gets pushed into them, or pushed in the opposite direction from you, they might need a little bit extra attention. Lavamancers will bolt the tank, which can be interrupted, but their more dangerous ability is Molten Barrier, a self-shield that explodes for group damage once it expires, or is broken by damage. Be ready in case a barrier expires just before or during the Blazewing's Candescent Tempest, since the combined damage can potentially cause a wipe if you're caught unprepared. Otherwise, the Lavamancer's Molten Army is your priority interrupt, since it'll actually spawn more elementals, especially if you decide to chain pull and end up with 2 of these at once, in which case it might be hard to interrupt immediately if they try to cast during the Blazewing's pushback. The final boss, Sarga, casts a frontal on a random target. Just make sure you dodge this. He'll also put a major dot on a random player, called Molten Gold. This will definitely need healer attention. Then he'll spawn Ember Adds, which fixate on another random player, so use things like Ring of Peace to keep it away until the DPS can kill it. Eventually, Sarga shields himself and begins pulsing group damage until the barrier is broken. This is where you want to have healing cooldowns ready, and especially on high tyrannical keys, do your best to position yourself so that you're in range to heal everyone when this starts, though you'll have to dodge a bunch of swirls as well. The idea is to break the shield by digging through treasure piles for extra action abilities that deal damage, and since the pulsing damage from the shield gets worse over time, that means if you're going to help with the piles as a healer, you probably want to do so immediately so you can get back to healing before it gets out of control. Just keep in mind that digging through these piles gives you a harmful dot that can actually stack. That's another source of damage that's going to be ongoing that you'll have to heal through. Otherwise, rinse and repeat, and Warlord Sarga will die. And that wraps up my overview of Neltharus. I plan to continue making similar videos for the other dungeons as I gather enough gameplay footage, so make sure you stay tuned for those if you found this one useful. Until next time, thanks so much for watching, and have a good one.